guys? It's a aspiring psychiatrist here today. I hope you guys are having a good day. I want to quickly make a video on kind of the political commentator landscape and the way that I've seen it shift a bit, I'd say, in a negative direction. So just to kind of be open, one of my favorite commentators was the Rageaholic back in the day when I was like in high school, middle school. I think since then he's transitioned more to like Rumble and paid platforms like I think uncensored TV or whatever it is. You know, basically, it seems that controversial kind of inflammatory figures like the Rageaholic or I guess we could say Nick Fuentes now, they don't seem to be accepted or tolerated as much anymore. You know, I don't think a person with a formula like the Rageaholic can exist as much in a YouTube ecosystem of this kind of modern day and age, which is strange to think about. It's strange to reflect on, but I'll keep going down the roster and tell you guys what I think about the whole political commentator influencer scene. So Ben Shapiro is someone I've watched for quite a bit on and off, and then I started to become a more dedicated viewer when I was living in some states that I didn't want to live in for some business reasons. And, you know, a big thing that I found is he'll report very factual information and he'll present it very effectively. But the issue is that there's always a narrative that's kind of forming around those facts. There's always a certain ideological bias or perspective that is kind of implied around a lot of the things that he presents and says. And so it kind of becomes a bit of a, I wouldn't say echo chamber, but it becomes kind of maddening eventually because I'd listen to Ben Shapiro and then I'd sit there and have to take the news that he presents, cross-reference it to see all the facts, make sure that he's not on some slick nonsense, and then it would turn into a game of like, you know, paying attention but kind of being very critical of what he's saying in the background. And so it's too corporate influenced. It's way too influenced by some people with pools of money who are, you know, pitching in chips. It's just not fun to partake in those videos in any form. Andrew Klavan, I've actually watched since I was about 12 years old. I liked him a bit more back in the day. I like Andrew Klavan, but I think, you know, with his books, there's a key lesson to learn, and that is quality over quantity. It's better to work on one book, I think, for 5 to 10 years and for it to be a masterpiece than to make multiple books that people are just not really engaging with, practically speaking, for a brand, unfortunately. And I think, you know, the Daily as a whole went dark on resources they had. I collectively just cut. I just tuned it out. I was a very loyal viewer, but I couldn't. It stopped being as relevant to geopolitical implications after that to me. It stopped being as interesting to me personally. And so Steven Crowder, I'd say it's about the same. It's about the same. I just don't. It's like it's always a certain ideological pro-state, pro-government kind of frame of seeing things. It's usually not this more nuanced geopolitical take where the interplay of, like, you know, intelligence agencies or foreign governments are taken into consideration at the most critical points. It always boils down to some raw pro-America stuff, and that's fine. People can have that, but I think as you get older, it becomes kind of boring eventually. That's just me. One of my favorite channels actually is the China Show. I really love ADV China. I've been watching ADV China since I was about, goodness, I think 12 to 14, high school maybe. I think I was in high school, freshman year of high school. And I remember when they were doing their Exploring China series and they were doing a documentary and the Stay Awesome China stuff, and they would show you, like, I believe Shanghai and Hong Kong and some of these like electronics and technology based cities with their economies and during more brighter days. It was awesome. It was amazing. It really made China feel like it was this exciting and beautiful place where you could teach English, have an alternative lifestyle. They would encourage you to come there, but then they ended up actually making a kind of Chinese news show where I guess the Communist Party was not too friendly to them. They've had a lot of experiences they've shared, and it turned into a kind of anti-Chinese humor kind of thing. And they lived there. They would vlog there, both Serpenza and Lao Wai. Serpenza being the fellow on the left and Lao Wai on the right. But yeah, it just seems that whatever's going on in China, they report on it. They have access to Chinese news information that's very hard to dig up through American media, it seems. And unless you go on like X and go to very specific kind of threads, which can be tricky. So it's useful. It's just a wonderful show. Really teaches you a bit about the geopolitical landscape and Chinese politics. I would recommend it extremely. It is amazing. So Joe Rogan clips, or Joe Rogan in general, absolutely amazing. I'll say this. The Joe Rogan episode where he had Edward Snowden, the NSA insider, on, and Edward Snowden spoke a bit about a lot of the things that occurred with the federal government during 9/11, that was shocking to me when I first watched it. It really kind of pulled me into the intelligence community. I didn't expect it to, and it really kind of made me feel like I was part of a percent of the population who actually knows what's going on. It was very fascinating. Since then, I think there's been some FBI, CIA military guys on Joe Rogan's show. Some of them would sit there, open up very heavily about, like their very critical views on the government or corporations, right? Some of them would not be as open. It just depended on the individual, more or less. But recently, Joe Rogan, I think what I sensed was with the whole Epstein situation, he had a lot that he could say, and he waited to speak on it until all the facts were kind of released and in order, as much as we could get. And so the little bits of information that he has been dropping and kind of letting through his kind of verbal tradition on his platform is amazing. It's incredibly insightful, and I would recommend everyone watch Joe Rogan. Everyone already knows who he is, but it's actually pretty useful for discerning some nuance to a lot of this paranoia and hectic kind of nature of a lot of these Epstein releases that have been going on. Aside from that, I do like Matt Walsh. I think he's nice. I think he's a decent fellow, but I think the Daily Wire as a whole has become just a bit too, narrative. Kind of let's form a collective narrative together, like incentive kind of stuff. It's just a bit too sanitized for me. I'm not a big fan of the Daily Wire anymore. As a more conservative-minded person, I feel a disconnect. I really do. Aside from that, Uncensored America, I made a whole video on this, but in short, it's just not adding up. You have some guy, who works at a bar. He starts a nonprofit, and then that nonprofit sues the U.S. government for freedom of speech law violations because they didn't give them funding, but the college allowed them to host their debates. It's a bit too of a show and game dance. It's a bit too of a rich person's puppet show, as I talked about in my previous video, and it comes off as disingenuous. I think Myron Gaines, in a lot of his views and perspectives, such as his polyamorous views, I think he'll slowly kind of have a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy like Destiny. I think he'll go the way of Destiny eventually, where he becomes kind of a C tier celebrity. I think this is kind of the beginning of the end for a lot of his credibility for a lot of people, unfortunately. But you know, the Fresh and Fit podcast turned into juveniles screaming and yelling too often, and so I think he got a check or some incentive from Uncensored America. He sat there and does these public debates where he starts off by calling women stupid, and maybe it's a right wing tactic to expose the impact of woke ideology. Maybe it's not. I really don't know. It's hard for me to say, but I would say, in my opinion, it's indicative of a self-fulfilling prophecy of the conservative party collectively. Pissing off college students through insulting them in public debates is not exactly good for the conservative perspective. Let's say that. So at this point, what's going on with Polymarket, right? Like, what do people think? What are the predictions? Well, the first thing is Gavin Newsom is being predicted as the most likely presidential candidate for 2028. Now, I'm going to be honest. I don't hate California. I think a lot of people who hate California are East Coast, kind of people who are trying to cope. That's my opinion. But at a certain point, Gavin Newsom he doesn't have a good reputation because California has gone up into flames so many times. And the most recent time there was corruption with the fire department budget where people were getting six-figure salaries at the top of the pyramid while, the actual functioning operative budget of the fire departments were not properly in line. So, yeah, if he gets elected, it's not anything to do with Democrat, Republican, none of the above. I really do think Trump was a bit more Democratic than a Republican. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think it'd be a good thing. I don't think he'd be a good president, principally. I think that this is a bad move strategically by the Democratic Party. I think they need some fresh, young people in there. I would prefer Cortez or Kamala Harris. I'm a bit tired of hearing Gavin Newsom talk, but maybe I'll do more research into him. I don't know. The Republican presidential nominee most predicted is J.D. Vance. Also, there's people saying Donald Trump jokingly and Trump Jr., which is also kind of funny. But yeah, I could see it. I could see J.D. Vance being this, kind of wonderful narrative to spin to people, I guess. He's an ex-military guy. It makes sense to me. I think at a certain point it's tough because if it was someone more in the line of Trump, like kind of a, educated celebrity who's a controversial kind of figure already, and they could kind of play to that tactic, I think that would be wiser. Because people get bored. J.D. Vance is a white dude with a beard. People in this modern day and age, they need to be entertained, right? And so I don't think it's the absolute best selection possible, but I think he would be a good president. I think he would do a good job, and I wish that Kamala Harris. Which party will win the House in 2026? 85% of people on Polymarket are saying the Democratic Party. And you know what? I think they're right. I think that a lot of conservative, right-wing spear thinking kind of people, the commentators, will have you think differently. But the reality is that the ICE raids, the whole Venezuela thing, and the people both armed and unarmed during the ICE raids that were shot publicly is bad optics for the Republican Party. And so it has nothing to do with the actual quality, I'd say, of the individual leadership at this point. They've hurt their brand recognition so badly, and Trump was so aggressive with some of his decision making that I think it doesn't matter whether it's a new fresh person to the presidential candidacy, some person with a lot of recognition. I think the Republican Party is going to have an uphill battle, and I don't see them winning. I think they shot themselves in the foot and had a self-fulfilling prophecy with Donald Trump, and it is what it is. It's sad. I don't think it doesn't make me happy, but it is what it is. So I just wanted to quickly mention Pearl Davis at the end, because I think she's such a sign of the times culturally. She's a bit of a zeitgeist. I've talked to her a few times on her show. I don't hate Pearl Davis, but she comes off as a bit too performative and disingenuous, truly and honestly. She comes off as, I'd say, inorganic in her personality presentation. And so when you look at the initial growth of her channel, 156K views straight off the bat, okay, whatever's going on there, I want to figure it out. That's all I'm saying. It just seems a little bit like someone threw her a bone to me. But hey, I don't know. But what's interesting is that Pearl Davis, her mother, who I think is far more interesting, Jennifer Davis, Jennifer Hannah Davis, I believe, was actually a United Nations board of directors. And so, hey, I don't think that connection hurts. And they both Hannah Davis, who has a YouTube channel called Be Exponential, it's actually really cool, and her father are just rich, connected people. So, honest, Hannah Davis is way more cool. So, it is what it is. So, yeah, guys, that was my quick video breakdown on the political scene. I just wanted to kind of get that off my chest, to kind of clear my mind. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Keep being healthy, be happy, I guess. Drink water, eat vitamins and minerals, and stay positive, and be you. So, yeah.